Let's bring in now Alan Scott Bolden, a civil and criminal defense lawyer and former state prosecutor. Good to have you joining us. Welcome to the program. So just talk us through what we're going to see happen in Georgia today, what we're going to see Donald Trump experience. Obviously, there was a deadline for the defendants in this case to present themselves.
Well, Georgia presents itself as probably the most complicated problems for Donald Trump and his 17 or rather 18 co-defendants. In Georgia, if he's convicted, he cannot be pardoned, one. Two, the scheduling of these various trials, as you so properly laid out, is going to be a challenge not only for the criminal justice system, but for the political calendar as he continues to run for office. He is scheduled to submit today. He's agreed to a $200,000 bond before even submitting. But today, this evening, in the U.S., in Georgia, Fulton County, which is found in Atlanta, he will submit himself to authorities. He will have Secret Service with him. He will be driven into the location with his entourage, but then he will have to get out, and they will process him. They will fingerprint him. They will make him aware of the charges formally. They won't arraign him yet because he's got a bond already. That'll come on the 28th, I think, of August. But he will also be photographed, what we call a mugshot. And to date, all of his co-defendants have taken mugshots, including Rudy Giuliani, and they've all been released to the public, which is pretty normal. The other thing about the Atlanta case is this is a criminal enterprise, the racketeering statute, and there will be cameras in the courtroom. And what he did federally on January 6th and what he was trying to do in upending the investigation, or rather the proper transfer of power after he lost the presidential election in 2020, here it lays out a criminal enterprise that he is a political crime boss in trying to undermine the elections at the state level, which is a very detailed indictment. This is the most problematic and the one that's going to take the longest to try. But Fani Willis, the state prosecutor, has asked for a trial in October of next year, which will be right in the midst, if he gets the presidential nomination from the GOP, right before the general election, which is scheduled for November. We'll see whether that date continues.
Indeed. And one of the other developments is that in the midst of all this, Trump has shaken up his defense team. He's switched lawyers. Just tell us about that.
Yeah, Steve Saudal is a trial warrior, if you will. I've never tried a case against him, but by reputation, he is a fierce advocate in the courtroom. Donald Trump has lots of lawyers. He needs lots of lawyers. And in this case, he's paying for a lot of lawyers. The last campaign finance report, he spent over $40 million in legal fees that were hard-earned money from those who support him and support his defense. But he's got a top-notch trial lawyer in Atlanta. He's got top-notch trial lawyers, although lesser known than the traditional white-collar criminal defense bar. But expect Steve to be very aggressive. The state prosecutors for Fulton County and Atlanta know Steve. He's a regular in the courtroom on the defense side, got lots of trial experience, and look for him to try the case in the courtroom, not necessarily in the press.
Okay, and just talk to us about the timing of this, also with relation to his other cases, because news just coming in is that the Georgia prosecutor has proposed an October 23rd start for a trial against the former president and his 18 co-defendants. This is according to a court filing. So how will that work with all these timings?
Very carefully, if you will. I mean, he's got a civil case that's set to start in March. I think the documents case, which is probably the most simplest, is scheduled to start in May. Remember, this is all campaign season, all primary season. He's up by anywhere from 35 to 50 points over any of his other opponents. And so the feds, the two federal cases, two state cases, the judges and the lawyers will try to work well together in scheduling these trials. But there's a lot of documents to go through, one. And the Fair Trial of the Speedy Trial Act under U.S. law requires that the cases be tried within 70 days unless the defendant waives that 70-day speedy trial mark. Trump has waived those in several of his cases, but the speedy trial piece goes to the government and the public as well. They have a right to know. And so the government wants to try these cases as soon as possible. Trump's strategy is to delay them. And so they will have to negotiate between the lawyers and the judges and the government who goes first, how long they anticipate that those trials taking place. You got to pick juries. We're in uncharted territory, quite frankly. We've never had a former president and very few individuals that have been indicted at the state and federal level, 4 different indictments. He's facing 91 charges. For him to avoid this, he will have to run the table and beat all 91 felony counts in order to avoid incarceration. He's not pleading out. If you try the case and you get found guilty by any jury, state or federal, most judges are going to sentence you to prison. And so, again, I don't know how all of this is going to pan out. It's going to pan out carefully. We'll have to watch closely. But Donald Trump is in a lot of trouble. And regardless of what his campaign says and whether he gets the nomination or not, the criminal justice system could care less about the political process. And he's going to start to feel the impact of the criminal justice system sooner than later.
All right. Well, you've already mentioned that this Georgia case is one of the biggest challenges for Donald Trump. But what are the legal pitfalls that this case could come up against, if any? Because none of these is open and shut.
Well, the defense in this case has alluded to and kind of telegraphed that they believe that the cases ought to be dismissed because Donald Trump and others were exercising their First Amendment right, that they were exercising their duty to challenge the results of these elections. And as a result, there's no there. There's no criminal conduct involved. This president had a right to do this. His co-defendants had a right to do this. Secondly, that many of the lawyers in this state case in Georgia will argue that they were advocating for their client. They're required to be zealous advocates. And as a result, the attorney-client privilege is in place here. And all the lawyers were doing were advocating for Donald Trump and advocating for a full investigation in not just Georgia, but Arizona, Pennsylvania, Michigan, some 3 or 4 additional states here. That will be part of their defense. The problem with those defenses is it's okay to have a First Amendment. It's a precious right under U.S. law and the Constitution. It's okay to be a zealous advocate for your clients. But once you make affirmative acts that involve criminal conduct, all of those defenses go away. And in this case, the state prosecutor in Georgia is saying, you can have your First Amendment, you can have your attorney-client privilege, but you made affirmative acts to undermine the results. You made affirmative acts to try to have a state official find 11,000 or 12,000 votes to undermine the results of the voters in the state of Georgia, to create conflict once the vice president, Mike Pence, was going to certify the results of each state that submits it under the Constitution to the Senate to be perfunctory to just approve what the states have certified. Remember this is not a federal issue. This presidential races and federal races are all run at the state level, not the federal level. So if you're running for U.S. Senate, the U.S. Congress, or even the president, the state rules control who votes, how they vote, how votes are counted, and where they're submitted for approval and certified at the state level and then gone on to the U.S. Senate. That's an important issue to watch.
It certainly is. Alan, thank you so much for your time. Great to have you on the program. Alan Scott Bolden is a civil and criminal defense lawyer and former state prosecutor.